this is Emma Sperry, and you are listening to UC3P.
Welcome to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. This is UC3P, our eponymously named podcast on policy, politics, and current affairs. My name is David Raban, and I'm the production manager for what we like to call the main page. Today, we talk with Audra Grassia, a campaign veteran with experience planning and executing programs for private, political, and nonprofit organizations. She recently worked on programs and campaigns for Wicker, Emily's List, Hillary for America, and the Democratic Governors Association. 2 notes before we get into the interview. First, if you listened to last week's episode, you'll know that this week we originally planned to bring you an episode with Harper Reed, who's the CTO of Obama for America. We did speak with him, but we had some technical difficulties in the recording. Right now, we're not sure if or when we can bring you that interview. It was a really good interview, and we really want to thank Mr. Reed for giving us his time. Second, this interview with Audra Grassia was recorded last year. We think it still stands up against the test of time, but that said, just note that the context is well before the president was impeached or the primary season had gotten underway. Now, let's get straight into the interview. Without further ado, here's campaign veteran Audra Grassia.
Maybe if we could just start out by you telling me a little bit about your background and how you came to be involved in the field of data analytics and political campaigns.
So I got started in politics over 15 years ago. I was trained in campaign management through a program at the time called Campaign Corps that was sponsored by Emily's List, a prominent Democratic political organization. And I basically went on campaigns from there. I spent several cycles working on campaigns, mostly doing research and communications work. And I then took a break for a little while, went back to grad school, got my master's in public health. And when I rejoined the political world, a lot of stuff had come online around data and analytics. It really appealed to my analytical brain. I took statistics and other analytical courses in grad school. And so I decided that I wanted to just learn everything I could about it. And that's when I made the shift to my career to focus more on data and analytics over comms and research.
And what was sort of the state of the industry at that time? My impression is that things have sort of come on in leaps and bounds, even over just the past couple campaign cycles. So what was sort of the state of the industry at that time?
So my break happened between essentially 2008 and 2012 during first Obama administration. And that was really where I think the big data revolution happened. And even with the 2012 campaign, President Obama just made, again, you said leaps and bounds, and I would use the same words with the way they use data and analytics in campaigns. I really came back in 2014 when I started working as the deputy political director for the Democratic Governors Association. And that's when I realized there just had been so much that had happened in the time I had been away at grad school and a few private sector gigs. And there was so much out there that I wanted to learn. So I then joined Civis Analytics as a client services person and later the analytics team on the Clinton campaign.
At a high level, why do campaigns use data? What is the purpose of a political campaign using data? And this doesn't have to be any sort of particular answer, just anything that comes to mind about, even like concrete examples or just philosophically, what is the reason that campaigns use quantitative information?
So at the end of the day, campaigns use data for the same reasons they do everything else, and that is to win. But to win, they have to accomplish a lot of little goals along the way. Introducing a candidate to voters, raising money, raising issue awareness, reminding people to vote, reminding people where to vote, how to vote. These are age-old strategies, but we just have more data at our fingertips to help us optimize those strategies.
And what are some different types of data that campaigns use? What are some specific examples of data that a campaign might collect to service some of those goals?
So at its most basic level, and where data really started in campaigns, is from the field. You go knock on a door, you ask a voter who they're supporting in the upcoming election, and then you're hoping that they're supporting you. But if they're not, then you're hoping to persuade them. Each of those door knocks is a data point. Each of those supporters is a data point. Understanding what the issues people care about. So knocking on that same door saying, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, what are your 3 most important issues? People say things like healthcare, education, jobs, and using those to inform your campaign message and your strategy. Understanding even the most basic thing like, does the person whose door you're knocking on even know who your candidate is? If they don't know who your candidate is, then you couldn't possibly vote for them, right? So those are some really basic examples, but we also use data in how we fundraise, not just how to message, say, a fundraising email or a tweet or a Facebook post, but also where to message and what we're asking for every time we make an ask. Does it make sense to ask people on Twitter for $2,500? Probably not. That's where you're going to get your $25 donors, for example. Like I said, my background was in research and communications. And even in my earliest days of campaigns, we always had polls. Polls are a basis of quantitative data that we have on campaigns, and we use them for guiding our message strategy all the way from whether people even know who your candidate is to how favorable that candidate is viewed to the issues that are important to folks. Again, we're kind of going after the same age-old strategies that have always won elections, but we have a lot more information to process and figure out how to optimize those strategies.
So it sounds like campaigns started using data to sort of augment the functions that they were already performing and to sort of enhance their strategies in ways that maybe sort of already existed. Do you think that the availability of not just data, but also the technology to store it, process it, analyze it, has that availability simply facilitated campaigns doing things the way they've always done them, but better? Or has it actually tangibly changed campaign strategy?
I do think it has fundamentally changed campaign strategy, like just the sheer number of mediums by which to communicate with voters, for example, right? We now have social media, all of the digital outreach tools that we can use. We can now reach voters in so many different ways, but you wouldn't use those tools if it wasn't an efficient use of time. So on one hand, they're data collection tools. On the other hand, they are time optimization tools, if you will.
What I'm curious is whether new data and new technology has simply augmented existing campaign strategy, or if it has actually spurred development in new and innovative campaign strategies.
New data and new technology has certainly augmented existing campaign strategy, but it has also spurred new strategies. For example, we now have data models that tell us with much more precision how likely somebody is to come out to vote or what message they're more likely to react to, whether or not they've ever answered a polling question or not. So we leverage data to understand more about the voters we're talking to, and then we adapt campaign strategies around that. What's more is that the onset of all of the digital tools, not only are they points of data collection, but they're also platforms for experimenting with various campaign strategies, whether it's fundraising, message and communication, or simply getting people, volunteers into your campaign and engaging folks with your campaign. So the answer is yes, both. But at the end of the day, again, I think the goal of the campaign is to win. And we've just added a lot more things to do in order to get to that win.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, totally. How would a campaign perform social media analytics? What would they do specifically in terms of data they use or analyses they perform to understand how to perform media buys or how voters are forming impressions of their candidates through social media?
You probably won't like this answer, but it's the right answer. And that is, it really just depends.
Sure.
When I talk about the goal of a political campaign, I'm saying that the goal is to win. That's relatively straightforward, but again, you have a lot of little things you need to do to get there. Well, when we talk about the goal of a social media campaign, the goal is, you can't quote unquote win a social media campaign, right? I use the example of getting volunteers to help your campaign. Is that the goal? Is it to get people to sign a petition? Is it to get people to donate $1 to your campaign? Is it simply to get one of your posts to go viral? Or is it to actually persuade voters? All of those goals are different, and it depends on which thing you're trying to do as to which social media metrics actually matter. I think this is something that actually a lot of folks in the political world grapple with. We all like to see our likes and shares on Facebook and Instagram, but that might not actually be what is best for an ad campaign to persuade voters, for example. It might be what is best for a fundraising campaign to get a bunch of donors, or for a petition campaign or something. But it really just depends on what the goal of a social media campaign is in order to decide what metrics you should be looking at. And I think this is where we need to educate folks a lot better across the board, is engagement metrics do not equal persuasion effect, for example. I'll just stop there.
Yeah, totally. That's super helpful. So maybe to zoom back out a little bit, what are some of the biggest challenges that political campaigns face when it comes to working with data? I'm specifically thinking about maybe issues of access or storage or privacy with concern to individual voters that they're collecting data on. What do you see as being big stumbling blocks to deal with?
I actually think one of the biggest challenges we face when working with data on a campaign is understanding what data we actually need to make strategic decisions. Again, it sort of depends on who's using the data, what the data is being, what data we have access to, and what the end goal is. But it can be overwhelming because there is just so much available information that we're keeping top of mind, that at the end of the day, data is to serve everything else on a campaign. Data is not in and of itself an end goal. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. More specifically and tactically speaking, I think access, storage, privacy are all challenges. I think we have obviously struggled a lot in the last several years with data privacy issues in terms of how easy it is to, hack people and how much information we leave stored on our Gmail accounts, for example, and just how to protect people's data in a really reliable way. And then in terms of access, there's a fine balance between ensuring that data is protected and making sure that the right people have access so that they can do their jobs and can optimize towards those strategic goals of the campaign. I do think we've come a long way in terms of anonymizing data, making data sharing a lot easier by using tools that require people to log on and two-factor and everything else, and don't allow for massive downloads of lists, for example, but still make it accessible to query and analyze and whatnot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think the point you make about data for data's sake is not helpful. Data has to serve an end goal is super important. And there was a time when I was sort of reading about, I felt like I was reading a lot of stories in the news about, the big data revolution and, micro-targeting and how political campaigns know more about you than you know about yourself. And then, once that sort of played itself out a little bit, I feel like I started reading a second wave of coverage of this industry saying, micro-targeting and big data and modeling, they're not cure-alls. They don't have all of the answers. Like, you might have a consumer survey that tells you whether an individual voter likes anchovies on their pizza, but what does that actually tell you? How is that actually helpful? So I think your point is well taken.
Well, and I would actually just extend that a little bit too. I think in addition to making sure that the data analysts, data scientists, and the modelers, for example, know what the hoped for end goal of the data is, it's really, really important to make sure actual decision makers and stakeholders understand how to then apply those tools to their campaign. And I think, again, this is somewhere where we could always improve. As data practitioners, educating constantly around how to use these tools appropriately and properly to achieve the goals, but also making it easier for people to